Joining us now with more reaction to yesterday's fireworks on Capitol Hill, Robert Charles. Robert Charles worked in the Reagan and Bush 41 White Houses. He was the Assistant Secretary of State under Colin Powell for Bush 43. He is a nationally recognized author. His latest book is Eagles and Evergreen, and he also represents AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. Mr. Charles, good morning, sir. How are you?
Thank you, Bob, for having me. It's an interesting morning.
Oh, my goodness, you aren't kidding. Listen, I'm going to jump right to the heart of this whole thing and ask you, as you watched Bob Mueller yesterday, did you see more incompetence and maybe somebody who doesn't necessarily have it all going on for him anymore, a confused man perhaps with some problems, or did you see a skilled tactician trying to delay and obstruct the questioning of the Republicans with his constant interruptions of, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm sorry, could you tell me where to find that? I'm sorry, could you tell me this? Oh, that's not in my purview. Because we didn't get much from him yesterday, but what we did see was a man who very clearly was not in control of that report.
Yeah, I think that the testimony of Bob Mueller, who historically was viewed with favor, more or less, in Washington, is one of those things that the Democrats should have asked themselves or told themselves, be careful what you ask for. They're the ones that insisted upon bringing him before them, and I had always thought that Graham and the Senate actually should bring him before them and actually do some of the things that Jim Jordan very expertly did yesterday. The sad fact is that understand that I come at this from a slightly different perspective. Under Newt Gingrich, I ran the biggest part of the Oversight Committee for 5 years, and so we regularly held hearings. We regularly vetted witnesses. I ran the Waco hearings. You are very careful about who you put in front of that microphone. I think that the Democrats are in a strange, stumbling sort of frenzy to try to create enough of a predicate for something that they'd like to call impeachable that they just have stumbled all over themselves. And this is really, in a sense, this is like the capstone, because here was supposed to be their star player, their star witness, the guy that would expand on the report that didn't say what they most wanted it to say. And instead, he turns out in front of a microphone, undermining his own report, undermining the conclusions, confirming all the things, as Jim Jordan in your clip rightly pointed out, confirming that, frankly, they didn't go after the people they should have gone after, and the people they went after were really irrelevant and of no consequence. So, you know, I also think that I know Bill Barr sort of from a distance. During the Bush 41 era, I worked a bit with Terwilliger, who was his, and with Roger Porter and a few other people who were directly related to him. I think the world of Bill Barr. I think Bill Barr is a competent, capable, thoughtful, on top of his game attorney. And when he puts another U.S. attorney, which he has done, on the trail to find out what really happened, I'm confident that where we're really going to get the truth is from Bill Barr. But yeah, I think it really was shambles yesterday, and I think it's obviously disappointed some of the Democrats, but to me, I didn't expect anything better. I think they were really in a jam because there isn't anything to become actionable on. They're not governing as a House is supposed to. They're a divided caucus. They can't seem to get any legislation forward that anybody would sign, and instead they're preoccupied by doing a bunch of junk hearings in order to produce junk headlines for junk media that generate really just a sense, I think, on the part of the average American of disappointment. This is not what we want our Congress to be doing. And Mueller certainly was a disappointment, too.
We are talking with Robert Charles. Robert, again, was the Assistant Secretary of State under Bush 43, under Colin Powell. He also worked in the Reagan and Bush 41 White Houses. How familiar are you with Andrew Weissman, who is widely regarded as Bob Mueller's top, right-hand man in this investigation? And the fact that he has been exposed as being a corrupt attorney, somebody who is actually in on the Russia hoax. He met with a Russian oligarch during all of this run-up. And moreover, he is an extraordinarily close personal friend of the defeated Hillary Clinton. And on election night, he spent it with the Clintons. And then a few weeks later, he is appointed to the Mueller team investigating Donald Trump. How can there possibly, first of all, how can he be on the team? And second of all, it's my contention, Robert, and others, that he led this thing, that Bob Mueller's name was on it, but that Andrew Weissman led this investigation, and that's why it took the direction it did.
I think your inference is a fair one. I say that as a guy who did oversight for 5 years. I was just disappointed from the outset. I mean, as an older American, and I am a member and a spokesperson for AMAC, I look at things through a more cerebral lens. I've lived long enough now to think, to sort of look around corners and I hope see some of the things that are on the other side of the corner. And when they appointed that team, your first instinct is to say, well, obviously they're trying to find people who will be fair critics of the president. But when you look deeper, 3-4 layers in, you see that, well, the description of Weissman that you just gave is only a partial description. This is not an attorney who has distinguished himself for anything but aggressive prosecution. He, in fact, go back and look at his record before the Supreme Court. He's been reversed. What you come away with is the idea that this is sort of a dyed-in-the-wool partisan who at the same time really is known chiefly for being an aggressive, gotcha before we've even got the evidence kind of an attorney. And my question really goes back to the judgment of Mueller. Why do you pull around you? I understand in your law firm world you know some of these people better than others, but why do you pull around you a body of almost exclusively Democrat partisans? I understand that gives you validation later when they say, well, you didn't whitewash a report that cleared the president. But at the same time, you then delegate all your authority to these partisans, and it taints your report before you've ever begun. And I think although the president said it in tweets and he was a little more direct, I think his point is right, that if you pull partisans in to do a nonpartisan investigation, it's tainted from the outset.
The old appearance of impropriety line, right? I mean, you would think he would have
That's
just
right.
appointed, at least a balanced staff of 19 lawyers,
right.
and of course he had 40 FBI agents. Put a balance of people there who are maybe Clinton
That's right.
loyalists and who are not, just so that it looks like, hey, we had a bipartisan investigative group here, and this is what we came up
That's
with,
right.
because it certainly would never look that way now.
You're absolutely dead on. And, the law is only as good as the faith that the people have in the law. We really still are a country dedicated to honor and the idea that we honor the law because we believe it to be true and not fungible. And when you taint the law by making it partisan, you've undermined the very rule of law that you say you stand for. And so that was my complaint from the get-go. If you're putting people on this that are not credible because their judgment is already tainted by being arch partisans, then you've kind of missed the boat before you even launch.
We're talking to Robert Charles, analyzing yesterday's testimony with Robert Mueller. Did you see the question and answer period with Representative Ratcliffe?
I was in and out of the hearings, so I rather saw them in and out, but are you thinking of a particular exchange?
Yeah, that's the reason I wanted to find out so I can set this up. The question of exoneration has been a very, very important one here. As pointed out by almost every legal scholar, including some on the left, it has never ever been...
That's right.
Yeah,
Yep.
It has never ever been the job of a prosecutor or an investigative prosecutor to find proof of innocence. It is in fact his job to try to find reasons to indict. And if there's not enough evidence to indict, by very definition, that person is exonerated. We didn't have evidence to prove him guilty of anything or to charge him see if he is guilty of anything. Therefore, in a criminal justice system in which the presumption of innocence is granted to everyone, then he is indeed presumed innocent, end of story. Yeah, and Ratcliffe exposed this by pointing out that virtually the entire second volume of the report, which was entering information that were not included as crimes, was simply undoing decades and decades, well, really a couple of centuries of criminal legal precedents.
You're dead on with respect to the law. And in one of my past lives, I was a clerk for the U.S. Court of Appeals, Ninth Circuit, for a Reagan appointee, and litigated a little bit after that. You're right on. Exoneration is the result of not finding guilt. And in this particular instance, you had a report which, when you have a case, it is typically, pursuant to the Constitution, a case of any kind. And investigating a case, you're looking at an individual case or controversy. You're looking at facts surrounding that particular event. And then you come to a conclusion, if you're a prosecutor, whether you will or you will not bring that case because there's a predicate, there's sufficient information that will support what they either call an indictment or an information, which is kind of a document. But there either is or is not enough information and support for that to go forward. And if there isn't, then the subject is exonerated. The interesting part about this is that the president used that word. I don't know if it's because he was talking to his counsel or not. He used that word right at the outset of the release of the report, and he was right. And when you get a decision from a court that comes down in that direction, you call it a holding. Anything that is added to that, anything that is opinion that gets lardered on like extra fluff, and liberal judges tend to do lots of that, and apparently liberal investigators do too, is called dicta. It's really useless. It has no bearing on the case. It may reflect their, in this case, partisan opinions, but it doesn't have any bearing whatsoever on the guilt or innocence of the party. And unfortunately, what you have here is a Democrat House led by Nadler, who I almost get the feeling he's got some prior axe to grind with this president from coming up in New York. But
he does. President Trump has talked about that in the past, that he's battled and sparred with Nadler in New York for years. Yeah. And in the president's words, he always defeated him, and that's one of the...
Yeah, in all fairness, Bob, I'll tell you what's really a disgrace, and it's not in that report. What's a disgrace is that chairman has run roughshod over the rules of the House. I ran a committee. I didn't gavel down every single Republican and ignore them. And he's done that for more than a year. He has literally, during his period of time as chairmanship, he has literally, in my opinion, obviated the rules of the House. Look at the rules of the committee and how you're supposed to recognize people. You know, Roger's rules, it's a very straightforward process, and I was counsel to a committee. What upsets me is that both in this series of hearings, obviously in the ones they plan ahead, and in the ones that they've conducted, they really have not honored the idea of being a representative to the House of Representatives for the people and allowing all parties to have their say. We as Republicans never gavelled down a Democrat who had a legitimate objection or point of clarification in a hearing. And he gavels down 30 or 40 of them in a row. And you say, where do we get to speak? I mean, thank God there were cameras up that I think embarrassed them into following some of the rules yesterday. But it's disappointing when the process itself becomes so partisan that the word investigation doesn't really mean investigation anymore. It just means excuse for holding hearings and trying to score political points so that they can, I guess, embarrass the president. That seems to be their goal.
Yeah, that is exactly what their goal is. And now, of course, to try to, even though it was a disaster for them yesterday, to continue to try to push for impeachment. They cannot beat him in 2020. I think they know that not one member of that pool of candidates can beat him, especially if the economy continues to hum along the way that it is. Right. So their only option is to try to invalidate his first election and impeach him. Robert Charles from AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens, also, of course, long political experience in 2 White Houses, and, of course, with Assistant Secretary of State position under Colin Powell. I really appreciate your great insight and analysis. Thank you very much, Robert. We'll talk again soon.